So this might seem like a little bit of a silly video, but I've noticed that sometimes students really have trouble gluing models together, and they feel like it's such a simplistic thing that they don't want to ask, and then they continue doing kind of yucky gluing. And so I figured I would just do a little demo about gluing, particularly with hot glue. So when you want to construct your architectural model using hot glue, one thing to try to consider is to mask that glue as much as possible. So if you're building just a model that's showing only facades, gluing all of your joints on the interior is such a better idea, because then from the outside you can't see anything related to that glue joint. So even if it is a little bit sloppy, no one's going to notice it, no one's going to see it. Another mistake that I see done a lot with hot glue is students are going to overdo everything with their glue and really glob it on. And once it's dry, it's very hard to remove without also then removing your chipboard along with it. And then finally, a thing that I see done quite a bit, and so I did a little bit of it here, is while it's drying and they want to kind of smooth everything out, students will sometimes, if they've got long nails, drag their nail. The nail works much better than doing your finger, because your finger is going to ball all of this up, but I've seen plenty do just drag their finger to try to seal it up and make it a little bit nice, or take some type of tool and try to drag it. But oftentimes then that just sudden temperature change from your nail or that tool almost balls it up and makes it a little bit worse. So I'm just going to go over some of the techniques I use to try to make nice seams when I'm working with hot glue. Hot glue is best for, of course, too, when it's time of like we're on a deadline and we got to get this thing done fast. I prefer kind of tacky glue. The Aleena's tacky glue is the one I use, or just regular Elmer's craft glue. And I just put it in these smaller bottles with this needle nose, so I have a little bit more precision when applying it. But this, of course, then is going to have some dry time weight to it. And you may not have that available to you. But right here is how I would always start off something with a hot glue model. And that is I take my edges and I tape them together from the opposite side that I'm gluing at. And pretty much the reason I do that is it's going to just help give me a little bit extra rigidity to take this form and hold it straight and hold it perpendicularly if I'm having that tape as a guide. And especially if I'm going to use something like tacky glue or Elmer's glue, I really want that tape, just because this is not going to dry very or instantaneously, and it's just going to help hold the shape while it dries. So that tape on the outside is super helpful. And then I also like to have some type of straight back edge to lean my work against too. A square, it can work just fine for that. Or in this case, I just went and got a thick book off the shelf and I said, okay, that's going to be what I hold my piece square against. Because again, then I can just run my glue gun tip across that without trying to hold everything in place. With your hot glue gun too, I'm gonna put that tail, or rather that stand, away. I prefer a much smaller one for architectural models than this guy, just because you can get into smaller crevices. But this one, what I do like about it a lot is that it gets very, very hot. And the thing that you always then have to consider is that that tip right there is holding all of that heat. When the hot glue gun's off, that tip is still going to remain hot. And that's what we can use to really help make these corners a little bit nicer. So what I'm going to do first is just, while pulling the trigger of the glue gun, I'm going to leave a bead of glue going down that corner, which I actually did just a very good job with it alone. But then I'm going to take my hand off of that trigger and just use the heat from the metal tip to flatten that seam out. This is not only going to help push the hot glue into some of those little crevices that are in there, but it's also going to clean up any seam. If maybe while I was putting the hot glue down, I had a little bubble, and so there's a gap, that's going to get filled in then with there, and it's going to leave for us just a really nice clean seam. So even then, if this is part of my model that's going to show, that's some handiwork there that I don't even mind showing, because it's just a nice clean seam. So to show it again on this side, again, I still have this tape here, to just kind of help hold some rigidity in my model. And then I'm going to put it up against something flat to help keep this as perpendicular as possible. Tail away on my hot glue, or my stand away. I don't know why I call it a tail. Pull and put my hot glue, and I'll even purposely put a little gap in there to show you kind of what I mean. So as I go and I pull that seam of it, now I'm going to keep my finger off there and just let the heat from the tip clean this seam up for me as I go. And of course, you're going to get little spider webs and such that you get from hot glue. But that is one trick that I love with a hot glue gun, to really clean up any of those seams that are there. And of course too, if I'm going to take like another paper material or some corrugated material to put it above on top of that, I don't even really have to worry too much about cleaning up a seam. And then of course at this point I would just remove my tape, because I don't need that tape anymore. So hot glue can be wonderful, and this tape too. Here's a good lesson that you should lint your tape before putting on your final models. But these were just some scrap pieces I was playing around with. Hot glue is wonderful for putting together stuff really fast when we have a deadline we need to meet. And it can be something that can be done really neatly if a little bit of time is taken for it. And then from the outside too, I can't see anything related to those seams. So I don't even have to worry about if they are perfect, because from the outside of this model, I can't see them. Now, if you have a model where the interior is going to be something that's visible and our finish is important, then tacky glue or Elmer's glue is the way to go, especially with chipboard and things like that. And the primary ways you can apply it is just from the bottle with the tip or with a brush. I often will I'll buy the larger bottle of tacky glue purely because I'm trying to save some money, and I get the larger bottle and then disperse them into these smaller bottles as I need it. Tacky glue does not do well in those needle bottle tips that we have in the classroom, purely because it's way too thick to actually get through those needles, I've found, but it does pretty well in these boxes. So with tacky glue though, you have a lot more dry time to spare with it, because it's going to take about the same amount of, or a couple of minutes for it to go. So what I'm doing now is I'm just picturing which one of my boards is going to be laying flat and then which one is going to go on top, so I know where to put the seam of glue down. And then I'll move that cap out of the way. I often will cut these caps off, but in a classroom I'm worried that they're going to go missing. Put a line or a seam of my tacky glue. Had a little air bubble. This is going to dry clear on my model, so even then anything that is going to get out of here or be visible outside isn't going to really make a difference to it. But with tacky glue, what I do have to keep in mind is I've got to sit and hold this for a little bit. So if I have some type of clamp to go along and hold it, that'd be nice. You don't have to brush it as I did either. It's just more, I apply the glue a little bit outside of my seam, so I'm just trying to work it into there so it holds. So then what I could do is I could leave this sitting, resting somewhere, go glue another piece, continue on with my entire model until everything's gone together. So tacky and Elmer's works surprisingly well in models. I at first thought you might think it's a little childish for it, but it actually works really, really well. Another technique you can do with corners, but this is particularly tricky to do with the laser, is a scored edge. So what I've done here, and I did not do this with the laser, I did this one manually, is that I've cut through with kind of a duller knife, but I didn't go all the way through the material. So on this side here, we just have the seam, which means then I technically don't need to glue anything at all. I can just score those corners, and it's gonna leave on the model a pretty nice, neat corner where these materials would be meeting, but they're not meeting actually because they're still technically one material. And then I would only have to glue one edge where everything would wrap back around. We can do this with the laser, but it's really like a touch and go with the settings of every material. Particularly foam board, it's very tricky to do with. But we can just score edges of materials and then they kind of become bendable and movable. And especially if I want to do something that is rounded or curved, then I really need to do those scores so I can move and bend. And then lastly, some things related to plastic and attaching materials. So the 3D print material that we use currently is PLA. There are no glues that we have custody of or that I'm aware of that will glue PLA easily, other than like just super glue. That UV nail glue, the regular nail glue, regular super glue, all will work well to attach things like this. But if we do anything with polystyrene or any type of styrene, we have Mr. Cement here, which is just great. You pretty much put your two pieces together and then you just use the brush to just let capillary action kind of fuse the two together where the seam is. And the other adhesive that we have for plastics, particularly if we 3D print anything out of ABS, is acetone or nail polish remover. So again, more me coming at you with just nail supplies. So acetone is actually going to dissolve. I'm not sure if I'm on the camera because I can't see it. Acetone is going to dissolve the ABS plastic and just kind of break it down. And so what we can do then is almost kind of plastic weld, where we are making the material kind of break down and sticky. We can stick the two pieces together. And then once that acetone evaporates, we'll be left with one fused piece. And we can also use it to kind of provide a gloss coating to things that are done out of acetone too. But yeah, so just a little demo of how we can make some nice hot glue joints and also just nice joints with any sort of glue.